Hello and welcome to S24 Television. Today we are diving into the launch of Hadari, the fifth documentary archive of the ConflictMemory Education Center. This powerful project shines a light on Nigeria's conflicted past and present, from the scars of the Civil War to the ongoing insurgency in the Sahel. To help us understand why this archive matters, I'm joined by John Costa, founder of the ConflictMemory Education Center. John, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Let's begin with context. For those who may not know, what is the ConflictMemory Education Center and what role does it play in today's world?
The ConflictMemory Education Center is an independent registered museum in the United Kingdom, and the role that it plays really is to be able to capture, amplify, but also put into context the voices of combatants and non-combatants and the impact of conflicts over probably since World War II and shaping the world that we live in today. So I think it's actually a very relevant project in order to be able to be promoted and talking about with you today.
Why did you decide to create a network of archives focusing on conflict and political violence?
I think growing up in London, you get quite used to knowing a lot of people from different parts of the world, and when you actually take the time to get to know those people, and the same where I live in Leicester now, we have people from all over the world, you suddenly realise that conflicts which are in the media, or maybe stories that are not in the media anymore, have gone out of the media's main line of sight, you suddenly realise those people are there not necessarily as economic migrants, but they're escaping some form of conflict. You know, whether that's a civil war, whether that's a war between states, whether that's now we're getting into things like climate change, the impact of things like that. So it really made me realise that for all the heritage and cultural work that I was doing, to be actually focus on things that related to conflict were important, but specifically conflict memory, so that that is not lost, and then we can use that information in an educational way.
How does the center use documentary media, film, photography, audio, and even new media to preserve and share this difficult memories, or will I call it histories?
Well, what you find is a lot of people will have a view of something which I would say, of conflict, which I would say pretty much mirrors what you see when you go into a museum, which is, you know, it's a timeline, they know when it started, they know when it ended, and they know how many people died, they know whose fault it was, and they might know maybe some of the consequences that happened afterwards. Well, of course, what happens is that's a very one-directional way of looking at it. It's only when you start drilling down into conversations with people that participated as combatants on both sides. Remember, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So you start drilling down into some of these conflicts and you realise that this is the information when it comes to the conflict and the fighting part of it. But when you start looking at non-combatants like women, children, the impact on infrastructure, the changes to areas, I think we really need to be looking much more at those things and challenging the official narrative of a lot of conflicts that we know, particularly since World War II, and those that have resulted from World War I that led to World War II and today, and particularly the world that we live in, that the more that we can use that in an educational setting to make people realise why these things are important, that we know them, maybe some of the people we think are enemies are not really our enemies, some of the things that mainstream media and also politicians use as a way of whipping up our fervour as to who's a friend and who isn't a friend is really important.
You're here in Nigeria for the launch of your fifth archive called Hadari. First, tell us, what does the name mean and why did you choose it?
Well, what I do I've got 4 archives so far that focus on Ukraine, Chechnya, Iraq and Afghanistan. And for each one, I've always chosen a name by speaking to someone that I know that is leading that archive about a word that is capturing maybe that kind of conflict memory of the impact of that. And so we've had storm, we've had sapling for something new, and we've had things like, memory, story. And I thought it was really important to do a little bit of research on Hausa, and also to speak to my colleagues here as part of S24 Television. And I think we all agreed that Hadari, which I thought was storm, but they explained to me was dark cloud. And it pretty much summed up, I think, what my vision is for the Nigeria archive, which is looking at that historical past, but also the sort of contemporary present.
Considering that you chose one of the major languages in Nigeria to name after your archive for Nigeria, do you think that in a way it represents everything about the Civil War as you think in the conflict memory?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I have a view and a memory of the Biafran War, which probably would shock quite a few people. But, you know, I'm 59 and I can remember very clearly my best friend at school in the East End of London. His name was Deepo Bajaloa. And only now, being older, do I realise the reason Deepo arrived in my primary school when I was 5 or 6 is the fact that he was coming with his family fleeing the Biafran War. And so I think it's beautiful to be able to finish this circle here by valuing his memory and looking at something like a civil war, which a lot of people get caught up on wars between nations or maybe between continents and things. But what people forget about with civil wars is they are based on something that is deeply fragmenting when it comes to communities. And I think when you look at modern day Nigeria now, you still see in the headlines or between the headlines actions between states in the south and states in the north that don't necessarily have a direct line back to 1967 and some of the things that happened over those sort of 3 years, but certainly they're still there, they're still alive in people's memories, because we're still not dealing with, you know, as we come up to the 60th anniversary in 2027, we're not dealing with the core fundamental issues, which is why are politicians and people in the media still able to influence the way we feel about other people, is because we don't necessarily understand them or the way they live.
What are the key focus areas, or what are the key areas of focus for this archive, and why are these so significant for Nigeria today?
Well, when I look at Nigeria today, I see a nation that is completely and utterly misrepresented in the way that it's covered by the global north. It's still seen through that cultural, colonial lens of the global north. When you come here, you realise that it has the resources, it has the people, it has the talent, and it has the ability to be able to share its story in a way that is about Africa and from Africa, not a story just about it. And that's what S24 television represents for me. But also I think that it's about being able to put that historical context from something like the Civil War, nearly 60 years ago, allows you to reach out and talk to the diaspora anywhere in the world as well, where they'll have a memory of it, or maybe they're part of the diaspora because of that. And then we bring it right up to modern times, which is, you know, the conversation that we recently had about, you know, Sahel and the insurgency on the northern border of Nigeria, I think, which is bearing the brunt and will continue to bear the brunt of that insurgency, particularly when it comes to things like banditry and the impact on NGOs like Code that we interviewed as well, that are trying to work in these communities and suddenly finding that they can't and they're being lost. If we don't shine a light on that through something like Sahel Watch as a collaboration between the new archive and S24 television, I think it's just another story that gets lost in that news agenda that's either dominated by someone like Donald Trump or just gets lost in that day-to-day politics with a new presidential election coming up here in Nigeria in 2027.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, it's still S24 television, where we're discussing conflict memory in the newest of archives from the Conflict Memory Center by John Costa, who lives in Leicester and is from London, or will I say is from the United Kingdom. And before we went on that short break, we said to look importantly how the new archive will help people better understand the lasting impacts of the Nigerian Civil War and the ongoing crisis across the Sahel. Mr. John, how do you think that works?
Well, I think it's about finding people that have memory of that time, yeah, or memories, maybe they were children and they've got specific stories to share from parents, you know, either that participated on either side of the conflict. They were part of the secessionist troops that, you know, crossed the Niger on their way to Lagos. They were thinking of, you know, how Nigeria having their own state of Biafra was going to benefit them, right through to maybe people that were on the other side, you know, opposing them and thinking, well, these people are here to fragment the state. You know, Nigeria needs to move forward as a collective. But then I think there's those memories of children. You know, I think one of the things that doing the research was very much around the role that radio played in people hearing about, that they were going to be breaking away, the role that radio played over that 3 years about, the progress they were making and stuff. And then also is thinking about some of the things that happened post the conflict. Did suddenly, when the peace agreement come about, was Nigeria suddenly a better place? Had it learned anything? What are the lessons? And are we still learning those lessons today? Or are we not even learning those lessons today? So for me, I think it's important that by looking through an historical lens, it allows you to have a contemporary view of it, because it's like, well, do we still have those beliefs? Do we still have people that want to break away? If we're not including people in the conversations of a modern Nigeria moving forward, making sure that they're still included, that we can look at through these lenses and see whether that's true or not.
Yeah, you're working in partnership with us at S24 Television on this archive. Could you explain how that collaboration will work?
Well, I think what's really important is when talking to you about S24 Television and what the vision was, it was very much around having news that was made in northern Nigeria, about northern Nigeria, that not only was beneficial to people in the local area, in Abuja, but in the northern state, but also maybe help to educate a little bit and shine a slightly different light on people that are in the south about what life in the north was like. There are positive stories, there are people making progress, there are people trying to be inclusive, maybe fight some of the stereotypes that people have about people from northern Nigeria. And I think also we need to have this international lens, which is, showing to the global north that Africa has the ability, particularly Nigeria, to deal with its own issues. It needs some help. Other ways it's leading. But if there's a positive story, is it being shared in that way, or is it we don't want it because it's a positive story from Africa? And I think, reaching out to the diaspora as well, which is, come back home and maybe give Nigeria a chance, and maybe some of the skills and experiences that you've got have a way of being able to help that. And I think this project, working with S24 Television, gives us some access to voices and equipment and people that we wouldn't normally talk to if it was done in a virtual way, say in a third-party country working with someone from the diaspora. The fantastic thing about this particular archive is it can be based here at S24 Media House. It can take the opportunity to talk to everybody about what are their memories of that, and suddenly something as simple as a vox pop, which is normally, what do you think? Have you enjoyed it? Did you like the event? Would you come again? Suddenly becomes about, well, we've also got this strand that runs through what we do at S24 Television, which is supporting this international archive, which is actually trying to get Nigerian people to reflect back on its own history and some of those prejudices, because I should imagine that some of the guys in the studio here will have views or memories or things to share about family stories that relate to that time, or maybe something that someone said to them casually since in a work environment that relates to where they're from or what their particular belief systems are. And I think it's important if we can shine a light on some of those things. It just makes us all a little bit more aware that something that's coming up for its 60th anniversary in 2027, when there is a presidential election, is something that still very much resonates as if it's a raw nerve, waving in the air now.
I'll see there is also a planned documentary series called The Sahel Watch. What should audiences expect from it, coming from the international lens, and also starting with the local perspective to show what this means to Nigeria as a country? That's if you say pan-Nigeria, then pan-African.
Yeah, I think it's from an African and also and a local, but also from an international perspective. I think the global North's media lens has moved off of Islamic insurgency since the defeat, in inverted commas, in Syria and Iraq. Maybe anything that makes our mainstream media now about the Islamic insurgency tends to focus on Kenya with Al-Shabaab, or on Mozambique, which is East Africa. So therefore, I think there's not a lot of vision when it comes to what's going on in the Sahel, that kind of capturing of the territory there. And of course, that borders right onto northern Nigeria's border, so it has a real kind of impact. And I think there's a Sahel Watch perspective internationally, which is, this is what the northern Nigeria view is of what's happening on our border with banditry and territory and things like that, and maybe supporting and focusing the armed forces and the police and the various kind of organisations that are part of the Nigerian federal setup to push back against what's going on in the Sahel. But also I think it's capturing the local voices, which I don't see in the international media, of the people on the ground that through no fault of their own suddenly find that their territory has been taken. And then when their territory has been retaken maybe by Nigerian federal forces, interviewing those people and saying, what was the experience like, that kind of, because I think just as important we capture those voices as maybe speaking to someone in a Ukrainian village where they've just retaken that from Russia. We start to capture the human rights abuses, the impact on real people, because we need those people to be on the side of the Nigerian forces when it comes to combating that. I think historically we've shown that you can't just have a kind of combative experience between two different people. You need to take that local population and they need to know why they're being helped or why they've not been helped yet. I think it's this kind of, we've got this information gap that something like Sahel Watch could really help to do. And of course, when we attract international media organisations that come to report on the Sahel, then maybe they might come to S24 television and the media house and say, well, actually, we've got an ideal base, we've got fixers, we've got experienced people that can do that. And we're doing it ourselves. So come and help us to tell that story. Don't just come and tell the story about us.
And why was it so important to base this archive here in Nigeria?
I think it's really important because of Depot. Like I said, I'm doing it as much for him as well. I'd love to meet him. Hopefully he's still alive. I have no idea what's going on. If I could find him, that would be marvelous. But I just think it's that fact that Britain, he's trying to, in some ways, and some people in Britain are trying to, particularly in the current time, alienate certain people and push back against and blame other people for, maybe our woes, our economy or whatever. But, our country, owes a lot to people that have been part of our global empire and, the Windrush and have done amazing things for our country and continue to contribute. And I think, the Nigerian diaspora that would have come during that time to the UK and made it their home and are kind of invisible, really. And so this is a great opportunity to be a lead consultant with yourself for S24 television. It's a genuine honour to meet the guys that are in the studio here today and be welcomed as part of someone that's trying to raise the profile of the modern day Nigeria, but also that's still wrestling with its past, as it will be with its election. But that's exactly the same in UK. And I think there's a lot more that unites us in these kind of struggles and divides us.
And even though you've answered this question, so I'd like to ask it in a more broader perspective to say, why was it so important to base this archive here in Nigeria and to involve local media organizations in its development?
I think it's very key to me that the archives that I've got so far that I mentioned and the 5 more that I've got in the pipeline tend to be either places that I visited, so I've got someone that lives there, or I've got someone that I've supported that are journalists, almost like asylum seekers in the UK. And the archive tends to come from a conversation with them about things that they'd like to capture and make sure that are not lost, their own personal experiences. Well, I think this is a really interesting opportunity because it's a way of grounding it in a community setting, in a location that not is just because it's in Nigeria, we can talk about the north-south divide when it comes to the civil war, but actually there's a real clear and present crisis that's going on at the moment, not too far away. Recently we drove to Kaduna and we're returning tomorrow. Well, the distance between Abuja and Kaduna the other way is the northern border, and where this situation's in play. So why not just have an archive that sits there capturing things historically? Why not try to do something different with it, which is about making up-to-date contemporary content through something like Sahel Watch as a series that goes out and is broadcast about something that we can see and we can feel and we can taste and we can touch now, and hopefully will resonate with people that watch it.
The ConflictMemory Education Center already has 4 archives launched. Could you remind us briefly what first cover?
Yeah, well, the first archive that I actually set up was about Ukraine, and that's called Booyah, which is storm, actually. It's storm in Ukraine and in Russian. And I met some local Ukrainians, and I said to them, would you like to have a pop-up shop in our local shopping centre, the High Cross? during a textiles festival, which I was helping to organise, to promote Ukraine. And they said, well, what was it you'd like us to show? And I said, well, you know everything we know about Ukraine on the television about the war. Come and show us why you're fighting. And of course, they turned up with some amazing fabrics and headpieces and music and historical items and things like this. And so I think it was more about people kind of got an understanding from that pop-up shop as to why these people were resisting what seems to be happening in their country. So it wasn't about war fighting, it was about people, the memories, the children, you know, the kind of culture, and maybe what the Ukrainian war seems to be about, which is the eradication of the Ukrainian culture. So that was one that was particularly interesting. And then Chechnya, I knew a local journalist from Chechnya who's now resident in Leicester, and we started talking about that. So we gave him access to our equipment that we own in order to make a documentary, not only about the conflict in Chechnya with the two Chechen wars with Russia, but also then to interview people from Ukraine, make that connection, and then create a documentary, which we did and showed that, which is great. Iraq, I've been dealing with a friend of mine who I used to work with at the Montfort University, Dr. Bahir, and we were talking about the impact on Iraq of a 20-year conflict where Britain and America played part of that kind of invasion, the impact on that, but no one's capturing the voices of people, particularly in southern Iraq, in Diwaniyah, where he's from. We'll have one view of it because of the conflict, but we don't have that view of local people and maybe why they were resisting, but also what's the impact been on them, and also things like sanctions. And then finally, the latest one that I organised in a couple of months ago was about Afghanistan, and that's called Qissa, Qissa, and that story. And again, I was introduced by a BBC producer to Kadir, who had left Afghanistan a couple of years ago when everything unravelled. But a fantastic journalist and a very professional filmmaker. And so just by supporting him, we've got this way of capturing the other side of Afghanistan rather than the ones that people see in the news. So for me, it's always about trying to find people and individuals that can contribute, because it's giving them an opportunity to tell their own story, but something that we can create educational resources and make more people aware.
In what ways do you think your latest archive, named Hadari, connects with the existing archives in the network? And I understand you have 5 more archives planned for later this year. So let's start with the connection between the latest one and the previous 4.
Well, I mean, obviously, being in Nigeria and doing things in Nigeria, it's a natural fit to do something. But there's an opportunity to do something slightly different by having it based here at S24 Media House. You've also got a collection point where people can, share items, come to be interviewed, whether that's an audio or an oral interview or a filmed interview. There's a location that people can come to bring items that can be documented or photographed. There's also some fantastic Instagram archives based here in Lagos, where they're digitising lots of newspapers and stuff, and you do a search on there for the Biafran War, and they've got lots of newspaper archives as well. So for me, it's combining that film, photography, audio and new media to be able to create a physical space with physical items and maybe a display for the museum that's not just digital or online and YouTube. So I think, for me, it's a perfect opportunity, because it's that civil war coming up for its 60th anniversary, but there's also what's going on the northern border.
Again, I understand you have 5 more archives planned for later this year. Which regions or conflicts will they focus on?
Well, the next one will be Sri Lanka. And I've got a colleague there that will be developing something, it was a very destructive civil war that went on for very many years. People probably have heard of the Tamil Tigers and those kind of atrocities that were perpetrated by them and government forces and things that happened over across the world. So Sri Lanka was a natural one, because it still wrestles with it every time there's a presidential election and the impact on tourism and stuff. Then it'll be Pakistan. Because obviously in 2027 seems to be an important date. They'll be coming up for their anniversary of partition, when the British divided India into Pakistan and India. There's the impact of what happened at the time there with the movement of people. But then there's also their 3 wars that they've had with India, and obviously the recent border conflict that they've had as well. So Pakistan seemed to be a natural one there to be able to do something, hopefully with the National Pakistan Army Museum as well. We're looking at doing interviews with old soldiers that maybe have been impacted on some of those conflicts. Then it's going to be Cambodia. I went to Cambodia 3 times back in 2017 and 2018, working with S21, the Dual Sling Genocide Museum, and help them with some of their sort of social media, how to fight that Disneyfication of genocide memory. When you're on holiday and you come into an empty cell where someone's been murdered and tortured, how do you represent that without making it sort of grotesque through using holograms and stuff? So that was interesting. So I think Cambodia still wrestles with that Khmer Rouge experience as well. And then there's Rwanda, which obviously a lot of people, again, something on the African, in 94 in East Africa. I've got a friend that's just moved there, so looking to develop that with him. And then finally, the last one is going to be Latin America, which is weird because rather than picking a specific country in Latin America, I think Latin America is one of those things, it's like a complete void when it comes to our news. Whether it's Mexico or Nicaragua or Brazil, Argentina, we have relationships with all of those countries as Britain through whether it's support, or maybe with Argentina with La Malvinas or the Falklands War in 1982. So rather than trying to pick a specific country and not doing it properly by having it as Latin America, it means that we can really deal with the Latin American, South American, Central America continent correctly by reaching out to the right kinds of people. But when you look at all of those 10 conflicts combined, the similarities between civil wars, insurgencies, things like, Mothers of the Disappeared in Argentina, sort of state forces when it comes to terrorizing people. There's so many linkages that suddenly people realize that what's happened to them, they're not alone, and therefore we can start sharing some context.
Good, thank you. Due to time, at its heart, this is an educational initiative. How do you think this new archive and the other archives will be used in classrooms, workshops, and public exhibitions? Why is it important to document conflict not just from a political perspective, but also from the lived experience of communities and individuals?
I think a lot of these archives that I see and a lot of stuff that's captured is gate-kept by academics as a way of saying, I'm not interested in that because it's not behind a glass cabinet. And so for me, it's about making it fully accessible, getting rid of that sort of cultural snobbery that comes with people. Only those that are experienced or academically qualified should be the ones that, capture those stories and share those stories. Whereas for me, someone who's got lived experience of that particular thing, now whether that's lived experience because you were there, or lived experience as the child or a sibling or a relative of someone that's experienced that, and you've got those stories in the family, these are the things that are missing from our institutions, but also from our mainstream media when it comes to this is the impact on this kind of thing on me. And I think that's why it continues to happen, because we can look at through the lens of these things that they seem to happen in isolation. Anything that happens in Africa from the global north perspective, well, it's Africa. Whereas in fact, a lot of the things that happen in Europe or anywhere else in the world, if we start to share the commonalities, we realize that a lot of this stuff is misrepresentation of people's culture and heritage. It gets twisted by politicians, supported by the media, and before you know it, we're demonizing another group of people. It's their fault, let's do something about it. So for me, I think the more that we can make these resources available to people from the point of view that they feel they can contribute to them, they'll then use them and share them with other people. And then we can start working with people like educators and those that are working in informal settings that want to use those materials to make learning things that they can share with people, that they can contribute back. Do I think that these archives are really going to be effective?
And finally, John, what do you hope Hadari will achieve both in Nigeria and internationally?
For me personally, I think it will make, I'd like it to make people realise that their voice, no matter who they are, where they're from, or what their belief system is that their story is just as important around the table as everybody else's. So if you have a story that you can share about something historical, like the Nigerian Civil War nearly 60 years ago, or something that's going on today, then you can reach out to the Hadari archive here, based here at S24, and you also then get access to S24 television when it comes to telling the stories that really matter to people.
John, thank you for sharing your insights on this matter. It's really important to us as S24 and also the audience generally. The launch of Hadari is more than an archive. It's an opportunity for reflection, for dialogue, and for understanding. We look forward to seeing how it grows and contributes to Nigeria's history and its contemporary challenges. This has been S24 Television, connecting Nigeria to the world. I am Halima Abdulrauf. Thanks for watching. See you next time.